Is China the new colonial power on the continent? That's what we're asking as Xi Jinping continues his state visit to South Africa. Just today, a bankrupt Eskom inked a 33 billion rand loan with the country. Is this part of China's takeover or just a friendly handout when we desperately need it? For more on this, we are joined by Leslie Mudimu from Political Economy, Southern Africa, and Dr. Azar Jammine, Chief Economist at Econometrics. Very good to have you both with us. Leslie Mudimu, let me start off with you. So, Eskom has been bailed out. I'm just wondering, at what cost, though?
That's a very curious question to ask, and I do believe that for a lot of people they will be trying to understand what is the catch with the deal. However, since we are still within the week of BRICS Summit, it's curious for us to see how the week ends, and when we get the final details of the deal, we can understand at what cost it is to South Africa.
And when you talk about catch, I mean, what are you referring to? The loans that we know is often linked to Chinese cash?
When I say catch, I'm referring to the terms in terms of the percentage of money they have to give back to China. So I do believe that after the end of this week, we can at least understand in finer details what this deal will entail and what the percentage of the percentage of income they're going to want to get back on the loan.
Because that's the problem, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
This could potentially cripple Eskom and the other companies, Transnet, that have received these handouts. I mean, what should South Africa be looking for when it accepts these loans from China?
Somehow I don't think that China will be charging an exorbitant interest rate on it.
Because that's often what we see.
Correct. I think rather it will tie it to commitments for South Africa to purchase Chinese goods or for Eskom to purchase Chinese inputs into its production of electricity, be it in new power stations, be it in its distribution facilities, etc., so that the Chinese can gain from this.
And is this a new way of working? I mean, I know China, often when it goes into countries, it'll say, okay, we'll take your oil, we'll take your minerals in repayment.
I do believe that there will be an element of that, certainly. But beggars can't be choosers. Eskom is in dire straits, and frankly, this comes as a bit of a rescue.
All right, so let's see what's in it for China and take a listen to what the Chinese president had to say just a little earlier on.
So as to further unlock cooperation potential between our two countries, China supports South Africa in hosting an investment conference and jobs summit and will take active measures to expand imports from South Africa so as to support the government in achieving its development agenda.
It's obviously a strong relationship, isn't it? I mean, they both need each other.
Yes.
Is the import sector the driver here?
I do believe so, and I actually agree with him in the sense that the relationship between China and South Africa is something that will help the developmental goals of South Africa, and especially when it comes to the business sector. I would think that South Africa stands a better chance in terms of exporting agricultural products to China, and I do believe that this is something that could benefit South Africa, and the relationship between the two means that China provides a market for agricultural goods that are coming from South Africa, and I do believe that's one of the benefits that we find about the relationship between the two countries.
Why do you think China is a country that goes to other countries where others may fear to tread? What is it about their thinking here?
Firstly, they need to expand internationally far more than most other countries because of the size of their population and because of the growth of their economy. In order to sustain that growth rate, they have to keep trading and they have to keep investing elsewhere. But it does raise the dangers of China coming to be seen internationally as a new colonial master.
And do you think it is?
I think we could well end up that way, certainly. And especially when you've got the counter of Trump moving towards isolating America, this really opens up a huge opportunity for China to gain a huge advantage in terms of international trade and investment over the United States. And we should not forget that within 10 to 15 years, China's economy will be larger than that of the United States.
Do you think that's true. China's the new colonial power here because possibly in Africa, these countries don't have the clout, the leverage to deal with China on the same level?
I agree that to a certain extent, some African countries don't have the leverage to deal with China. However, I do have faith in South Africa. I believe that, as I mentioned before, if South Africa was to tap into, for example, the agricultural sector, that agricultural sector could be a potential bargaining chip that could leverage the relationship with China. If, for example, South Africa created a relationship where China was investing more in the technological advancements needed in building up agriculture in South Africa, there's a potential that South Africa can start overproducing and exporting to China. So in as much as it can be seen as a potential neo-colonial power, I do believe that in the case of South Africa, our country does have some stronghold, and they do have potential elements that they can use to bargain that relationship, so it's not as exploitative.
How do you think South Africa can fight back? I mean, we've got a huge unemployment problem at 27%. We know that when the Chinese move in, they bring in many of their own workers, and they use our low-salaried workers, but often don't pay them the minimum wage.
That you're absolutely correct, and that is one of the huge criticisms that African countries have had with regard to Chinese investment, that they've simply brought their own people in and haven't created commensurate employment. But I think South Africa does stand a little bit of an advantage over other African countries in that it does have some technological base to offer China, and as was mentioned in the food processing sector, they can actually capitalize on that. And the second point to bear in mind is that South Africans are very, very aware of the dangers of colonization given their own history. And so, you know, China must also be aware of South Africa's history. And so I think they'll be less inclined to adopt an exploitative approach than they might in other African countries.
And how does South Africa play the relationship between China and Russia? Russia's also seeking to invest. Russia's also power and energy hungry. Where's the balance there?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful situation to be in from one perspective from South Africa.
They can call the shots.
They can call the shots more readily. And I think that each of those two superpowers has a comparative advantage in different areas. And South Africa is in a wonderful position to take advantage of each of those comparative advantages for its own benefit.
Let me put this to you. It comes from McKinsey. One example of the struggle they're talking about, you know, the exploitation of the workers here, the low wages that they face, is the South African steel industry, which is under threat of collapse as local producers struggle to compete with imports from China. So you've got the bad working situation, you've got the cheap imports from China. How do you compete with that?
I understand there's probably concerns within the steel industry, and most of the blame has been put on China. However, I think it understates the role that South Africa itself has played in contributing to the issues, especially within the steel industry. And as a result of privatization and as a result of the pricing methods that were used in the steel industry, it led to South Africa producing, I would say, the second lowest quality of steel internationally. So that also is something that contributed. And for many people, they overlook that fact and blame everything on China. And in as much as, yes, Chinese presence has also had an impact on affecting the steel industry, much of the blame can also be attributed to South Africa. So in most cases, like for most of the examples that people bring up in terms of how China is relating to South Africa, there always is an aspect to also consider about how domestically some of these areas have been governed by South Africa, and how that also contributed to possibly China taking advantage of that, or perhaps adding on to the problem. So South Africa has had a part to play in some of these instances.
Lizzie Mudimu and Azar Jammine, thank you very much for that positive spin at the end there. But as you say, let's see how it plays out. Well, coming up tonight, we speak to South African tennis sensation Kgothatso Montjane, the French Open, Wimbledon. What's next for her? Stay with us.